Even as a teenager, Angus Robertson Sinclair was a sexual deviant. No woman or girl safe in his company.
A psychiatrist report from the Times said that Sinclair would in fact not respond to psychotherapy, and the report clearly stated that he thought that this man would always be a danger to the community.
He was obsessed by sex, and he was prepared to use violence to get it.
In 2014, Scotland again came face to face with a monster. The question, how many women had he actually killed? Could anyone get inside the mind of a serial killer? The sun sets as a man drives a woman from the city. When he gets to open countryside, he drags her, probably unconscious, into scrubland. Her name is Mary Gallagher, and what Angus Sinclair is about to do to her will remain secret for nearly 20 years. It is also the latest in a series of attacks on women and girls that he's mounted since he was a teenager. One day, the 16-year-old Angus Sinclair follows a little girl called Catherine Rehill. Just 7, she's from the neighbourhood. He asks her to go on an errand and then to return to his parents' flat. When she gets there, he will pounce.
He lured this little girl back to his flat and he began his attack. The extraordinary part about all this is that there was a knock on the door while he was attacking her.
Will he panic? Might the visitor save her life? The adolescent Angus answers the door.
He'd bound her, he'd gagged her, and yet he was able to talk to somebody at the door calmly and to say, "Look, just come back when my mother's back."
Equally calmly, Angus walks back upstairs, enters the room, and turns to the girl.
This little girl must have been absolutely terrified, and yet he went back and continued.
Catherine, just 7 and a family friend, was to suffer a pattern of merciless behaviour that Sinclair would repeat decade after decade.
It was incredibly early in his criminal history, but that modus operandi that became known as the Sinclair MO was already apparent. He bound, he gagged, he raped, and then he strangled with whatever was at hand. And in this case, it was a bicycle in a tube.
Within half an hour of meeting the teenage Angus Sinclair, Catherine Rehill is dead. Throughout the grisly episode, Sinclair remains cool. He stays that way when questioned.
One of the most, I think, chilling aspects of Sinclair was how cold and callous and composed he was. He actually phoned the police to say that there was the dead body of a little girl on the stairs of his apartment block. Now, he'd killed this little girl, but he called to report it, never confessed to it, and he was able to do this as calmly as he was reporting the most basic of things.
He said that a wee girl had fallen down the stairs, but we know he must have thrown her down the stairs after killing her, which shows us that he had the composure, even at the age of 16, to make up a story of this kind and deliver it to the police.
Police and psychiatrists already knew about the young, menacing Angus Sinclair.
He'd committed what was then known under Scottish law as lewd and libidinous acts against an 8-year-old girl, so he was very well known to the authorities by the time he killed Catherine.
Angus was calm when police began to question him about Catherine's death. He was not going to confess easily.
Police began to suspect Sinclair. They began to poke holes in its story. It was clear that she'd been strangled, and it was clear that she'd been raped. She had not died just falling down the stairs.
This is a big moment in the story of Angus Sinclair. Police could prove that Catherine had not died from a fall, as Sinclair had reported. She'd clearly been strangled. But how could they prove it was Sinclair? Without a confession, he might get away with the rape and murder of little Catherine. What drove this young man? Hayley Quivinyami Smith is a forensic artist tasked with providing images of people based on scanned evidence. She offers a more human interpretation than a simple mugshot, one taken in different times.
Interviews were not recorded in those days, so a great deal of pressure could be brought upon a suspect, and quite possibly they tried a great deal to get a confession out of Sinclair, but in this case it was not effective. He stuck to his story.
What follows was a scene which would be repeated throughout the life of Sinclair, a showdown between interrogator and killer.
Sinclair was so in control. This was the 60s in Glasgow. We're not talking about police interrogation being necessarily gentle or quiet. These people were professionals. They would have gone on him hard.
He wouldn't budge from that story. They poked holes in what he said. They pointed out where she'd been found at the bottom of the stairs. They pointed out the evidence of the way she died. He wouldn't move. He wouldn't change his story.
He kept his cool and he refused to confess. He did not say a thing.
Detectives were amazed at the young Sinclair's ability to stonewall, to give nothing away, and so they turned to Angus's older brother, John. He was no stranger to rebuking the younger Angus. The boy's father had left the family years earlier, so John had been forced to play the father figure role.
From what anybody can tell, John was the only person that had power over his brother Angus, but there was absolutely no love lost between those two men. In actual fact, John, to this day, hasn't told his grandchildren that Angus is even related to them.
Police looked to John to get Angus to confess.
John described his brother as cold, emotionless, as a wee boy who showed absolutely nothing. He always had said and maintained that he was a bad sort, this kid. He was more than willing to help the police when they really needed that confession for the 1961 killing. He was there and he helped them.
John was allowed into the interview room, and he pushed Angus to confess if indeed he had done it. And he might have expected his brother to break down in tears or at least show some kind of emotion, but he did not. He resisted all attempts to persuade him to confess.
If you have done this, it is wrong and you must confess. This is probably where he's more likely to listen, more likely to take heed than with anyone else in his life.
And then, calm as you like, he confessed. He said, "Yes, I did it."
So he had finally confessed, under pressure from his brother to do the right thing. But could the teenage sex attacker and murderer ever really change? Would any female ever be safe in his company?
The original psychiatrist report actually states that this man will be a threat to society, will be a danger, and I quote, from now onwards. There's no time scale. They're basically saying that this person, there's nothing you can do about it. It was unequivocal in the psychiatrist's report.
Sinclair was convicted of the murder of Catherine Rehill and given 10 years in prison. The sentence was a reflection of his age. At 16, he was considered legally a child himself. However, he had become a very dangerous individual, and with parole, he might be back on the streets before too long.
What could you do? He was a 16-year-old boy. You can hardly lock him up and throw away the key.
It was inevitable that Angus Robertson Sinclair would one day be released, still obsessed by sex, still capable of killing, and still young and strong enough to overpower a woman if he wanted to. Who would be his next victim? In 1967, 6 years after being sent to prison and aged 22, Angus Sinclair was released. Was there any suggestion that he'd somehow reformed?
There was an attempt to rehabilitate him. The prison services actually trained him. They gave him a trade in painting and decorating so that perhaps when he came out of prison, he would have, be able to try and create a new life.
Sinclair would eventually find work as a painter. For now, the late 60s in Glasgow, he seemed to be leading an ordinary life.
He actually married a young trainee nurse called Sarah Hamilton. They had a baby, they settled down, and he became great friends with his brother-in-law, Gordon Hamilton.
Between 1970 and 1977, Sinclair seemed to have stopped offending. His work record was good. By the mid-70s, he seemed a reformed character. Friends described him as personable. His drinking buddy and brother-in-law was often seen by his side. On a chilly October evening, Angus Sinclair and his brother-in-law Gordon Hamilton head for Edinburgh, about an hour from Glasgow. Sinclair had been out of prison by now for 7 years. He was living the life of a family man. However, as two young girls were about to discover, he was anything but reformed.
So this is a guy who would walk into a pub looking like just anybody else, a normal guy. After work, you'd sit down, you'd have a drink with. There were no clues following that professionals around him felt this was someone that was, in effect, incurable.
In the days before selfies, youngsters used photo booths to capture moments. Nobody knows where in Edinburgh Christine Eady and Helen Scott had this picture taken, but it became an iconic image. Girls excited to be out, their lives ahead of them. In a rare move, a judge in Scotland hearing the case against Sinclair in 2014 allowed cameras to record his summary as he described Christine and Helen's night out.
There was no reason for Christine Eady or Helen Ann Scott to think that 15th October 1977 was going to be particularly eventful. To all intents and purposes, they would have a pleasant Saturday night out, the sort of occasion they would look forward to for many years to come with friends and family, including perhaps children and grandchildren. Helen, shy and retiring, and Christine, more outgoing, had not long left school and started work, no doubt harbouring ambitions of moving on to greater things. It was not made clear in the evidence how Christine saw her future, but we know that Helen wanted to be a children's nurse.
The girls may have harboured grown-up ambitions and felt confident enough to go to a bar, but they had no idea what or who was out there on a dark October night when they may have appeared much older than they were.
Christine and Helen were teenagers who wanted, like every other teenager, to feel grown up. Don't forget, they're at that balance between child and adult, and it's very, very exciting to act like an adult. So they would have walked into that pub thinking, my goodness, so this is what it's like. This is what it's like to kind of, feel grown up and go out with your friends and be a bit sophisticated and have a night out.
They were children, really. They'd made themselves up, got dressed up, and they went out on the town looking for excitement, looking for fun. But the truth is they were defenceless.
I think the irony would have been that these girls felt in control, but actually the variables around them which were putting them in danger would have been things they would have never in a million years considered.
Sinclair and his brother-in-law were in the same pub as Catherine and Helen that evening.
Sinclair and Hamilton latched onto the girls straight away. The girls were out partying, they had a group of friends around them at the pub, they were having fun and they were planning to go out for dinner afterwards. But the men talked them into staying, and so they stayed on in the bar.
When Sinclair would have seen them, he would have invariably clocked the fact that they were very young, therefore vulnerable. He would have clocked the fact that they were trying to seem more sophisticated and older, therefore probably more open to speaking to someone who was giving them attention, who seemed like an older person. That would have worked to his benefit. And I think in general, it probably would have appealed to that very sadistic, controlling aspect of his behavior, the idea that these are people I can subjugate and control very easily.
Whatever dreams they had, they turned into nightmares shortly after they left the World's End pub. Little were they to know that they had the misfortune to be in the company of two men for whom the words evil and monster seem inadequate.
It's horrific thinking about the level of torture and violence that these young girls endured, and how different their night started to where it ended up. It started full of hope, almost full of mischief, thinking, we're doing something that maybe we shouldn't. We're going to a pub and we're a couple of years younger, and our parents said we couldn't, but we could, and then this whole shift to darkness and that realization of having absolutely no control and being in the grasp of somebody who was actually enjoying their fear, who was enjoying their pain. It's a horrible thing to even contemplate.
To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened to Christine and Helen. Had they been laughing and joking right up to the moment that they realized things were not what they seemed?
So the moment you are confronted with something that's in complete opposition to what you expected, it's a complete shock. And that's where the fear must have genuinely set in. That's where the horror and the terror for these girls, because not only were they experiencing this terrible violence, but I think at the same time, it would have been such a shock to them. It would have been outside their repertoire of what this night would have looked like.
At some point, those poor girls must have known that their lives were in danger.
This was something that had never entered their consciousness. So you're not only dealing with the horror and the terror and the physicality of what's going on, but psychologically, it must have almost felt unreal what was happening to them.
They were never seen alive again.
The bodies were found on desolate fields miles apart in the East Lothian area of Scotland. Both were naked. They had been bound and gagged, raped and strangled. What was clear was the brutality that the girls had experienced.
Serial killers are often motivated by extreme sexual fantasies, often involving power. They enjoy the power to make their victim suffer. And some of them, including Sinclair, like close contact, to actually hold the victim, perhaps look into their eyes as they take their last breath.
The girls were subjected to an ordeal beyond comprehension and then left like carrion, exposed for all to see with no dignity, even in death.
Police were to consider 500 suspects over the following 6 months before, absent any significant progress, they scaled down the search for the girls' killers.
It was a difficult time for detectives. They had no DNA profiling, they had no security cameras. Fingerprints were a possibility, but there were none on the clothes that were discarded. They had eyewitness statements to the effect that the girls had left the pub with 2 men, but their descriptions of the men were not especially helpful.
The coat worn by Helen and Christine's jumpsuit were left abandoned along with other items of their clothing at the murder scenes. Detectives hoped that science would one day find a way of revealing the killers' identities.
Angus Sinclair was actually considered as a suspect, but he was based in Glasgow. He appeared to have an alibi, and although he had killed before, it was when he was a teenager, and by now he was apparently reformed and a family man, and so he slipped through the net. Detectives dismissed him as a probable suspect.
Sinclair was married, but with a wife who apparently knew nothing of what her husband was doing when out at night. She loyally stays at home, watches TV, waits up late. Angus is just out with her brother, but she has no way of knowing the full story. What was going on inside the mind of Angus Robertson Sinclair?
Sinclair was a meticulous planner. He had demonstrated that all those years ago with the little girl that supposedly fell down the stairs. And it's probable that before he abducted the 2 girls at the World's End pub, he knew exactly where he was going to go with them and what he was going to do. He was clever enough to formulate a plan and carry it through without being detected.
Angus Sinclair was on the loose, not suspected of having committed any crime, yet showing all the hallmarks of becoming a serial killer. What did the authorities know of Angus Sinclair's background? He was born in 1945, Glasgow. He was the youngest of 3 siblings brought up by their mother, their father having left. His brother John has said that nobody could control the boy.
John actually described Angus as not being this way because he fell in with bad company, but rather that he was the bad company. He was the person you wouldn't want your kids to hang out with. He was the one that had it in him to be bad.
By the time he had reached his teens, the young Angus Sinclair had stolen from the offertory box of his local Catholic church. He had broken into houses. He had become involved in a range of petty crimes, which meant that he was well known to the local police.
Nothing was off limits to Sinclair. He stole from the Catholic Church with not an iota of conscience, just as he had no remorse with the killing of the little girl all of those years ago.
And this was the man that the police knew all about, but who the system allowed to be free. 1977, the year Christine and Helen were killed, saw a series of other horrific murders of women. The first victim was a 37-year-old woman called Frances Barker from Glasgow. In June of 77, she was abducted, raped, bound around the hands and feet, and then strangled using a ligature made from her own clothes.
The first victim, Frances Barker, lived on a road where Sinclair had also lived. So you have a man known to be a killer, known to be obsessed with sex, and known to have lived in the same road as a woman who had been raped and murdered.
But the police seem not to have suspected that Sinclair was involved. Instead, they arrested another man, lorry driver Thomas Ross Young.
There's no doubt this was a very, very bad man.
And the evidence did suggest that that was the man who had killed Frances Barker.
Strands of Frances Barker's hair were found in the cab of the lorry. And then he told the police that in fact he suffered blackouts. He couldn't remember anything in retrospect. And then to add to the evidence, items of Frances Barker, things that had belonged to her, were found in Thomas Young's house.
In 1977, it really did look as though the police had got their man.
Young was tried and convicted of a range of offences, including the murder of Frances Barker. He was sentenced to life. Angus Sinclair was not a suspect, but Thomas Young never admitted killing Frances Barker.
Young spent 37 years in prison, denying that he was the killer. He protested his innocence until the day that he died.
The conviction of Young for the murder of Frances Barker remains hugely contested in Scotland. Many, including some in the police force, believe that Young was innocent. His arrest left a man on the streets who would be free to kill. Angus Sinclair. 7 weeks after the murder of Frances Barker, a 20-year-old Anna Kenny, also from Glasgow, disappeared. It would be another 18 months before her body was discovered on land near to where Sinclair had spent his honeymoon. She had been raped and strangled before her body was dumped in remote countryside. And then a further 6 weeks passed before the discovery of another Glasgow woman's body, Hilda Macaulay, again discovered in a remote area, again a victim raped and murdered. The next attacks and murders of women took place in October of 1977, the World's End murders of Christine and Helen, but they were not to be the last brutally killed that year. Agnes Cooney, a 23-year-old nurse from Glasgow, was killed in December.
Looking back, it seems inconceivable that this series of attacks and rapes would not be linked, but they were not, and Sinclair was not considered a suspect for any of them.
Angus Sinclair had raped and killed a young girl, been described as beyond treatment and sex-obsessed, and was living in Glasgow and working both there and in Edinburgh. In 1 year, 6 women had been attacked, raped and murdered in the Glasgow and Edinburgh areas. Yet Sinclair was not under suspicion for the deaths, and seemed to have an alibi for at least 2 murders. His behaviour throughout the year gave no cause for suspicion.
At this point in his life, Sinclair actually goes completely under the radar. He ticks all the boxes of a normal guy. He's got a job that he's holding down. He'd learned how to be a painter and decorator in prison, so he kind of takes on that job. He plays sports with his friends. It's actually quite a popular guy. You know, it's the kind of person you want to hang out with. A lot of his contemporaries said he's married. He's absolutely the guy next door.
But Sinclair was the guy next door who was also the man of your worst nightmares. It was now 1978, a year he began a series of sex attacks.
At least 10 children were attacked over a period of 4 years, abducted or raped, all of them left totally traumatized.
There were plenty in Scotland who thought they had a serial attacker on their hands, one who showed no mercy to his victims. But again, Sinclair went about his daily business without any outward sign of stress or guilt. 2 girls attacked during this time managed to escape. One would later describe her ordeal at the hands of her attacker. He had lured her into a tenement.
What is interesting about how this woman reported her experience of being attacked as a child is that it appeared to have Sinclair's mode of operation, that one-on-one relationship.
He asked her to do him a favour. He said, "Could you please deliver some change back to a flat that he pointed out to her? And remember that this had happened also with Catherine. He'd asked her to come back to his mother's flat after running an errand."
But when she reached the flat, her attacker pounced, holding a knife to her throat and telling her to do exactly what he said.
This little girl managed to escape, but it was remarkable because the pattern of what happened was exactly the same as what had happened to Catherine Rehill.
Eventually, police and prosecutors were able to arrest Sinclair. One of his victims had noticed that her attacker had specks of paint in his hair, and police arrested the painter and decorator Sinclair. They built a case against him which would see him sent to prison for life for 3 rape offences and 7 of indecent assault. But before that happened in 1978, Sinclair had met 17-year-old Mary Gallagher in Glasgow. He hadn't known her before coming across her in a pub in the city. Nobody notices him when he's talking to her. Nobody sees him tracking her every move. That night, she doesn't make it home. She simply disappears. Had Mary Gallagher become the latest victim of Angus Sinclair, serial killer? (1982), and Angus Sinclair is imprisoned for rape and the sexual abuse of 11 children. It was unlikely this already convicted killer would ever be released, but some in the Scottish police believed that he was guilty of a lot more than he'd been convicted for. Some were beginning to suspect he was responsible for the 1977 murder of at least 5 women.
There was a pattern to these attacks. They all involved women who'd gone to the pub and were going for a drink. They always involved a man who must have known Glasgow and Edinburgh. They involved bodies that had been found bound and gagged, and the bodies were dumped and found in very remote areas. It happened over 18 months. That's not very long. It seems extraordinary to think that nobody thought to link these things together.
The key moment in the case against Sinclair was to take place when he volunteered to join other prisoners in giving his DNA to police as part of a project to compile a British national database.
Science has been extraordinarily important. It's found the key to unravelling what happened inside Angus Sinclair's mind.
The last victim in the series of murders of women which had taken place in the late 70s was Mary Gallagher.
Mary Gallagher is this sweet 17-year-old, comes from a really loving family, very confident, interestingly enough, probably because she came from such a loving environment where people were kind and nice. Her threat level, her idea about threat would have been really minimal. She didn't have any reason to believe that the world was anything other than a perfectly safe place. So on that fateful day when Mary decides to take a shortcut, she would never have dreamt what was waiting for her.
Her killer had snatched her. She was violently raped and then her throat was cut. Experts believed that she died seconds later. Her body was dumped in remote countryside.
It seems that the killer subdued her with a ligature before he carried on the attack.
The nature of the attack on Mary suggests something about the mind of the killer. He does not threaten her with a gun, but uses a knife, so that he is actually holding her in close contact with her. And the violence with which he raped her suggests a man with a need for total control.
What we think happened is that as Mary walked, she was attacked. She was probably hit quite hard on the face, given the evidence. She was raped, and then she was strangled using her own trousers, which suggests that this attack went on. It was sustained. It also suggests it was very violent, and that there's a level of sadism involved here. This young girl set out to visit a friend, and she was confronted with the horror and the violence that was Sinclair. And again, we're reminded of that original psychiatrist report that said that he would be dangerous, in effect, for the foreseeable future.
Mary Gallagher was killed in November 1978, a year since the World's End killings. By the time Sinclair was sentenced to the sex attacks on children in 1982, nobody had ever been charged with her murder. In the 80s, Sinclair had given a DNA sample. Meanwhile, police had kept a range of evidence from the death of Mary Gallagher. By the late 90s, sampling techniques had advanced sufficiently to recover a DNA profile from a hair kept from Mary's body. It matched that of Angus Sinclair. Detectives confronted him with their evidence.
Sinclair is confronted by the police, who now have evidence, clear DNA evidence, that he was at the scene, and he loses it. He literally buckles at the knees, has to sit down. He's in complete shock. And the police says, great, the policeman is quoted as saying, okay, I thought, that's it, I have him. It's DNA, he was there. And he still refuses to say he was part of this crime. Not only does he refuse to say it at that point, but even when he's pressed, even for years afterwards, he refuses to tell the family that he was a part of it, what happened, thus not allowing them the closure that they deserve. Even with this huge amount of evidence, he still wants to be in control. This is still his game plan. I'm going to say I didn't do it. And don't forget, all those years ago, the only person that managed to get him to confront what he did was his brother. Again, the police leaned on him. They really tried to go hard to get him to confess. He never moved. He never twitched. And even in the face of DNA evidence 20 years later, this is not about taking any sense of accountability. This is not about anything other than this man wanting to gain sexual violent gratification and not caring about the effect that it had on anyone.
By refusing to admit his guilt, Sinclair ensured that Mary's family would go through the ordeal of a court case with all of the horrific facts of her final hours being recounted to a jury, who, mercifully for Mary's family, took little time in finding him guilty. Having faced the courts as a teenage boy, a minor in the eyes of the law, he was, 40 years later, convicted of murder.
The original psychiatrist had said all along that there was nothing that could be done to treat Sinclair medically, to change him from the dangerous, sex-obsessed, violent person that he was. And that psychiatrist was proved all too tragically right with respect to the murder of Mary Gallagher.
The key question: was Sinclair also responsible for the series of other rapes and murders in Scotland in the late 1970s? Damagingly, none of the evidence in the murders of Francis Barker, Hilda Macaulay, Agnes Cooney or Anna Kenny had been kept, but the evidence in the deaths of Christine Eadie and Helen Scott had.
He now knows, by virtue of the fact that the police have his DNA evidence, that he will be linked to other crimes. So does he own up and say, do you know what, this is what happened? No, not a chance.
Sinclair was already in jail for life for sexually assaulting children and for murder, but he may have harboured in the back of his mind an idea that one day, however old, he might get parole, and so he was unhelpful in confessing to any of the other crimes that had occurred in the 70s.
Helen Scott had worn a coat on that chilly night. It was found abandoned next to her body. On it, stains, which a quarter of a century later would yield enough of a DNA sample to link her death to Angus Robertson Sinclair.
In the end, DNA was discovered, his and his brother-in-law's, and so science was able to prove that they were at the scene of the attack.
You think of how many families whose actions will have irrevocably affected, destroyed in many ways. And does he confess? Absolutely not. Now, why is this? Is it a last semblance of control? Is it that last bit of control? Is he getting a high off of knowing that he's still causing pain? If this person, as psychiatrists described, was in fact sadistic, sadism comes in many different forms. It's not just physical, it can be psychological. So the idea that someone else is still in pain because of what I'm doing, years later, miles away, would have still made him feel good. Perhaps that was why.
In the end, not only does Sinclair deny the murders, but he accuses the girls of consenting to sex. Effectively, he wanted to pin it onto his brother-in-law, who was dead.
One of the most telling aspects of his personality and this narcissistic nature of him being able to control everyone and him being smarter than everyone was when he was confronted with the DNA evidence of the World's End murders. And he said, yeah, no, the evidence was there because I had sex with both of them that night. Clearly, I didn't do anything else.
Sinclair was charged, but what happened next was to cause great controversy. The new DNA evidence was not offered to the court, which, without it, dismissed the case. Sinclair was returned to prison to complete his other sentences. It took a change in the local Scottish law to allow suspects to be tried a second time for the same offence, scrapping the so-called double jeopardy defence to convict Sinclair. New DNA advances meant that even more of Sinclair's DNA and samples of his skin were found on the clothes of the murdered girls. But back in court, he again refused to confess.
In all this time, with all the pressure from detectives and police and the media, this man has never confessed. In fact, the only time that someone has an effect on him is when his brother sat him down and said, you've got to say what you did all those years ago to that little girl. After that, there was no sense of conscience, there was no sense of empathy, of anything. And that's what the trial judge picks up on. And when he sentences him, he says precisely that this person was psychopathic, that he had no empathy, no conscience. And that's what made him a serial killer.
Now an old man, Sinclair stood impassively as the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. Sinclair's notoriety is perhaps why the judge decided his summary of what had happened to Helen and Christine should be filmed as he passed sentence.
The nightmare for their families and friends, on the other hand, has gone on from those first awful moments when they heard the news no one should hear, until even now, 37 years later and counting. It will never end. No one who saw the evidence of Helen's father, sisters and boyfriend and Christine's mother could fail to have been moved by it. They are an example to us all, waiting patiently for justice while the authorities have worked tirelessly to achieve it. As for you, you have displayed not 1 ounce of remorse for these terrible deeds. The evidence in this case, as well as your record, details of which have now been revealed, shows that you are a dangerous predator who is capable of sinking to the depths of depravity. I do not intend to waste many words on you. You are well aware that the only sentence I can pass is one of life imprisonment.
The judge went on to ensure that the 70-year-old Sinclair will never be released by ordering that parole cannot be considered for 37 years.
Unless one day your conscience, if you have one, motivates you to tell the truth, no one other than you will ever know precisely what part you and Gordon Hamilton played in these awful events.
But what of the other murders? Will Sinclair ever be brought before the justice system to face trial for their deaths?
The women were killed in exactly the same way as Christine, Mary and Helen, the murders for which Angus Sinclair is now serving a life sentence. But there are plenty who believe that he should answer questions about at least 3 other deaths.
And you have to think, again, his belief about himself, being able to orchestrate all this, and his need to stay in control, overriding anyone else's need. The parents need to know what happened, the needs of the families to come to terms with this, the needs of the police to close these cases, anyone else around him. None of that. He had a very psychopathic, narcissistic personality and was never going to think about anyone else's needs in any of this. It was all about him.
Angus Robertson Sinclair has been convicted of killing 4 women along with a series of sex crimes. The murders of 4 more women, killed almost exactly the same way as Sinclair's victims, remain unsolved. One case of rape and murder, which had been thought solved, is under review. Justice is at times slow, but for some of the women murdered in Scotland in the late 70s, justice has arrived, with the sentence facing Angus Robertson Sinclair.
For them at least, the nightmare is over, and if they were not resting in peace before today, I hope that they are now.
Utoya Island, 500 meters off the coast of mainland Norway.
It's our paradise. It's like this island is the most beautiful thing on earth.
On Utoya, children, the youngest 14, group leaders in their early 20s, and mentors. A man called Anders Brevik wanted to kill them, one at a time. The paranoid schizophrenic had 654 from whom to choose.
These children were like sitting ducks. There was nothing they could do.
When he started to shoot, everybody just ran everywhere in the cabin, screaming and shouting, and there was chaos inside. And I was just under the bed, but I thought, oh my God, he's going to get in. He can hear that so many people are inside.
The text messages were saying like, there's shooting out here, I'm hiding, I'm underneath a table, I see dead people around me, my friend has been shot, I love you, I love you, I love you.
In the water that day, a group swimming for their lives.
When I saw that he was aiming for us, I thought that I'm going to swim normally and hope that if he hits me, I hope that I die and I die quick. I don't want to suffer.
Anders Brevik, blonde, middle class, what he might call Aryan. Behind the appearance, what was going on inside the mind of a serial killer. Anders Brevik had planned his big entrance for a long time. This was his stage, his moment in the spotlight. Why had he killed 77 people? Because Norway was broken.
He was the one that had to fix this. He was the one that had to give everybody a wake-up call. The whole world, all of Norway couldn't see what was going wrong. It was up to him. And once he started this, then the whole world would get it and he would be a hero.
The Norway of Anders Behring Breivik was pure, uncontaminated, clean, a land of extremes and of beauty, with boundless drifts of virgin snow in the north, plentiful seas in the south, and sophisticated towns and cities. Its capital, Oslo, the envy of Europe. Rich, too, oil-rich. Brevik may not have approved, but it is also the birthplace of a global institution whose very name resounds with the country's values.
When you think of Norway, you think of tolerance, you think of the Nobel Prize, you think of peace. Certainly you don't think of murder, certainly you don't think of racism.
For Brevik, Norway had gifts that few other nations could dream of, and God had made it that way. Norway's Lutheran Church had always preached simple principles, austere, unfussy, imposing doctrines of hard work and loyalty to the king and country. For Brevik, a Norway pure in word, deed, and race, an Aryan Norway, white. But a Norway at risk. To the paranoid Brevik, it was under attack from people of different colour, different faith.
Norway has an incredibly vibrant immigrant community. In 1980, there were about 1,000 people of Muslim extraction. 30 years later, there were 120,000. This didn't really agree with everybody, and we know that Brevik didn't like it at all.
There is not liking something, and then there's detonating a bomb in the heart of a city before deciding 69 times later that day to take aim and kill a person. Anders Behring Breivik, something of a loner, needed followers to his anti-immigrant, anti-Islam cause. He needed to become noticed, and what better way than to murder as many of his enemies as he could, and to target their children too, those he called Category B traitors.
Suddenly he fired maybe 5 shots, and all I can remember is that suddenly there was a kid missing from our group.
The journey to understanding Anders Behring Breivik begins with his childhood, privileged but troubled.
Breivik's family were actually very well respected in Norway. His father was a diplomat, his mother came from an old, well-established, well-respected family. So in many ways, he had all the founding to kind of grow up and do something that could have mattered.
When a baby, Anders' parents divorced. Later, a custody battle coincided with poor performance at school. 2 reports suggested he be taken into foster care.
At some point, issues started to emerge.
He was experiencing a big sense of rejection. In fact, it was reported that there had been suggestions that he should be taken into care because this divorce was so difficult.
If a youngster is exhibiting psychological stress, whether due to a parental split or issues at school, then these should be addressed. Usually they will resolve themselves, but if they don't, then we might have something to worry about.
But who could possibly know how worried Norway should be? As he grew, Brevik seemed to seek certainty in institutions other than his family. He became a regular in a Church of Norway chapel. At school, he formed few friendships. He joined the right-of-centre Progress Party's youth wing at the same time as it was proposing tightening immigration laws. By 15, he was a low-level delinquent, ordered to do community service and pay a fine for spraying graffiti, one of 3 minor offences that brought the adolescent Brevik to the attention of the authorities. Upon leaving Handel's gymnasium or school, Brevik avoided military service in the Norwegian army. He may have felt rejected. If he did, it became a pivotal moment in the history of Norway. Brevik opted instead to pursue a different means of serving his country. In 2001, he began to write a manifesto of his beliefs.
Brevik establishes two separate lives, the official one that is known to his friends, and a darker side in which he is writing a manifesto of hate against Islam and against the immigrants in his country, and promoting himself as a successful businessman when in fact he is a failure living at home with his mum.
The business ventures haven't worked. Socially, he's not very popular. He doesn't have any meaningful relationships, either professionally or personally.
The manifesto, as he called it, became Brevik's Mein Kampf. It was to reveal his mind, as few other killers have ever done. He espouses the virtues of far-right political thinking, details the wrongs of immigration, and bizarrely champions the cause of an ancient order of knights who fought in the Crusades against Islam. But the manifesto also, chillingly, detail his plans for systematic murder.
It was a simple thing, really, simple sequence. Publish the workings of his mind, commit the mass killings, and then step back and await the uprising.
There was one other thing about his manifesto. For now, he was keeping it secret. The first day of Camp 2011 was like those for young people going back a generation. Utoya was cloudless, warm. Not only Labour Party supporters loved the island.
I was there with an organisation called Nature and Youth, and the island very much reflected exactly that. It was awfully idyllic. It's the kind of vacation you never ever want to end. You know, you just think that I want to live here forever and ever, and the world would be only a peaceful place if everybody would get the chance to spend a week here.
Brevik was on his way to the island paradise, the place of peace. If anyone had been able to read his manifesto, they would know he didn't feel the same way about Utoya, or those currently on it. In 2011, the mind of a 32-year-old Norwegian, Anders Brevik, had descended into a dark, dangerous place. His childhood had been blighted by family discord. He'd had turbulent teenage years, and as an adult, he had failed at business. He had not made it into Norway's army, and had few friends.
Rejection is a powerful driver of discontent. So, if this feeling is internalized, if Brevik feels that he is a total failure, and at the same time other issues are developing, such as an extreme hatred of immigrants, then we have the development of a dangerous situation. Nobody can tell what might happen to Brevik. He's a loner, he feels rejected by the people that he most believes in, and he's not talking to anybody about it.
Brevik was deliberately keeping a low profile.
If you don't communicate what you're thinking or what you're doing, you'll fly under the radar. He wasn't part of a right-wing scene in Norway. He didn't use the internet to communicate with others, and so nobody really knew what was going on.
For the decade before 2011, Brevik refines an image of himself. He creates a character in his own definition of the world, one far removed from the multicultural, multi-ethnic Norway of the 21st century. To him, he was Brevik, the cultured young businessman, the Freemason, the heir to the Knights Templar, the Crusaders who had tried to wipe out Islam. And all of this he puts in his manifesto.
He begins by interviewing himself. So, this narcissism it shines out so strongly. He asks himself 100 questions because he believes this is clearly what the world would want to know. They'd want to know who this important, brilliant man was. So, the first pages aren't necessarily about what's going to happen. It's about, this is me, and you need to know because you'll want to know about me. And it's very punctuated by the need to be seen as someone important, as a game changer, as someone who will go down in history as making a difference.
Brevik obsessively played video games. Records show him spending hundreds of hours a year online playing World of Warcraft. In it, he embarked on missions and quests, crusades. He borrowed from its iconography in his manifesto.
He had some very specific drawings for how his tomb should look. A Knights Templar construction with columns and gold lettering. He had this kind of fantasy land that he lived in of the fatherland, Norway, battling the communist hordes.
It's strange to think how he came to arrive at the age of 30 with this extremely warped view of the world, a sickness in his mind that just grew and grew and grew.
In Brevik's world, there are the bad guys, and there are those who kill them, the good guys, like him.
Someone who's very narcissistic like that can't say, well, it's my fault. It's my fault. Maybe I should have made different choices. Maybe if I go back to school, there's something I can do. They won't think about it constructively. They'll fester, they'll get quite angry, and they'll think, well, whose fault is it? And it's always easier to blame other people. And what better than to blame something that historically happens time and time again? We blame the minority, we blame the other, we blame institutions, people that seem to be getting on. And for Brevik, it was the political establishment and the Muslim minority in Norway. They were at the center of his hate. They were the cause of who he had become.
Obviously, if you are an immigrant to Norway, you are a target. But he was also angry with others, the politicians that he saw as responsible for the immigrants being there, particularly politicians of the left. Brevik was planning mayhem and murder, and nobody knew.
He comes up with this plan. He is going to make as much noise as possible. He's going to be as disruptive and destructive as possible, kill as many people as possible. Because when he does, then people will read his manifesto that he's going to publish online. And then his theory is when they do, they'll be inspired. They won't be horrified. They'll be inspired. They'll understand him. And then all the social change that he's been hoping for that would make him great, well, that'll start.
Brevik, Norway's deluded, self-styled avenger, had chosen his targets. Category A traitors were politicians and immigrants. Category B were their friends and family. He spent years planning, travelling in all weathers throughout Eastern Europe, building an arsenal of weapons and explosives.
He was incredibly meticulous about the detail. He made sure that, again, he flew under the radar, military-grade hardware, but bought over periods of time from different places. He made sure that he bought them outside of Norway. And it was the same with the chemicals. He had to amass amounts of chemicals that he needed to create these bombs, but he did it over 3 years. Meticulous planning, always outside Norway, so the authorities ignored him.
On July 22, 2011, staff were arriving at government offices in Oslo city centre. Ivan Thorsen, a keen amateur footballer, was training to be a lawyer in Oslo. That day, he had a date.
I was walking back from work and I was supposed to meet my girlfriend in the town.
Norway's national newspaper, VG, has its offices adjacent to the government district. That day was like any other to veteran reporter John Magnus.
I've been covering, conflicts and earthquakes and tsunamis and stuff for 40 years. And I'm not that easy scared.
For news editor Marius Teitler, a Friday, also like any other.
I was on duty as a news editor in our newspaper. We were just finishing our meeting where we were planning our weekend editions.
Around the corner from them, Anders Brevik had put in motion the plans of a decade. For the image-obsessed Brevik, those plans began with dressing the part.
In his mind, the moment he puts on those black military clothes and gets in the car and decides to do it, that's his moment of transformation from Brevik the failure to Brevik the warrior.
He was dressed to kill, and earlier he had uploaded his life's work to date. his manifesto.
It's not very often that a multiple killer writes down what he's going to do for the whole world to see, and that's exactly what Brevik did.
He wanted people not to think that he was some random crazy killer, that he was, a very learned, thoughtful person who put thought into this. This also was a testament again to how he saw himself as important. This was his press release to the world about who he was.
Brevik had already parked a van packed with explosives in Grubagata, the government district.
He chooses the area of Oslo where the government has its offices. The government has let the immigrants into the country, and so politicians are also his target.
At 3:25 in the afternoon, Brevik detonates the bomb.
The first thing I remember is a thunder, or what I thought was a thunder, that turned out to be the bomb attack in the center of Oslo. I was sitting at work and finishing up a reportage, and we just heard like a huge bam, and it was reported to be horrible weather that weekend, so we thought, okay, now it's starting. And then we started getting reports in that there had been a bomb in the center.
I was walking down the pavement at Grubagata when suddenly I heard a huge bang, and I saw flames coming into my right-hand side.
We can feel and hear this big blast.
Well, I was, sitting on the front desk in my office, sort of minding my own business, and suddenly it's boom.
Anders Behring Breivik, product of a broken marriage, army reject, failed businessman, delusional adherent to a medieval cause who up to the age of 30 spent most of his time at home with mum, who hated Islam, immigrants and Norway's leftist politicians, had left the world of fantasy and video games, and was causing misery, terror, death.
He is a mission killer. He's doing God's work. He believes that he has the right to go out there and slaughter a whole lot of innocent people.
I could see a lady just 10, 15 meters from me. And yeah, or there wasn't a whole body. There were parts of her body. So, yeah, that was horrible to see.
We looked up to this main building in the government district where the Prime Minister has his offices, and the building was totally damaged. All windows were blown out.
There were people screaming, crying, but in the middle of the screaming and crying, it was dead silence in a way. I mean, it was just very, very scary. I saw people, kind of walking about, bleeding. People lying on the sidewalk, bleeding. I went for a walk around the government block, like a 5 minutes thing. I saw dead people there. I saw a guy hanging out from a window in one of the ministries. He was lifeless.
The work of the tortured mind of Anders Behring Breivik. 8 people died. On the operating table, Ivan Thorsen was hallucinating under the influence of the drugs that he'd been given.
I heard in the background, damn, we lost him. And I was lying there in the darkness, and I was convinced that I'm dead now. And I thought to myself that I really wanted to get more of my life, and this is so unfair. And I was actually really mad.
Brevik had carried out his spectacular. The world did now want to know about who had carried out the atrocity. It was assumed the worst was over.
I definitely thought that it was just one incident that happened. I had a hard time believing that this had even happened. And once it had, obviously, we're not used to things like this in Norway, so I can only speak for myself, but I definitely thought that then it was over.
I may be too stupid, but I thought, you know, this happens once, it doesn't happen twice.
But that was to be ignorant of the mind of Anders Behring Breivik, who was on his way to Utoya. Utoya Island, owned and managed by the Norwegian Labour Party AB. Small, a short walk from one side to the other. To generations members of the AUF, the youth wing of the party, summer camp on Utoya is more a state of mind than a place.
Sleeping in tents, it was making friends, it was getting your first kiss.
We play football, we play volleyball, people meet, people fall in love, you get friends for the rest of your life.
It was staying up late with your guitar.
There was great weather, we swam, we learned so much about AUF because I just became a member just 3 days before.
It was probably the best week of every summer throughout my youth.
I made friends for life there, and it was incredible summer, and I think that I became more active in AF after the first time I went on Utoya because it was so great.
Very many people have a very strong emotional bond to this place, and it's very understandable.
If you look at the names around the island, how you call like that different pathway or that little, the little mountain that's over there, it's all like, you know, it's the love path or it's the little mountain of friendship. Utoya is peace, Utoya is love, Utoya is friendship, and it's joy, and it's youth who want to change the world for the better. And it's always been like that.
I think it's unique for so many people to go to this place and to this summer camp out of their own free will and just be together because they share a political view.
A political viewpoint not shared by Anders Behring Breivik. To him, Utoya was a breeding ground for left-wing policies, the ones which had encouraged immigration to cause the contamination of Christian white Norway. Brevik drove the 90 minutes from Oslo to arrive at a jetty where a ferry is moored. It provided the only means of getting to Utoya Island.
He knew he had caused a spectacular killing. That was what he wanted. He could have stopped right there, but he did not.
News of the explosion was spreading. Details were scant.
Online we were able to publish the first news flash right outside from the streets. The front page editor, he borrowed a laptop and then just published one sentence. There has been a big explosion in Oslo city center. We will get back with more information later.
A guy from another county comes into this room and says, "Oh my God, you have to open the Newsnet site." And suddenly, you know, there's this big headline explosion in Oslo.
We said that first of all, we're just going to stay here. It's the safest place on earth, she said. And we're going to have a barbecue and we're going to have fun.
On a situation with a lot of youths on an island, hysteria could spread quite fast. So they spend a lot of time saying, you know, Utoya is the safest place to be, and we are on an island, and nothing can harm us here.
A response Brevik had surely anticipated in his planning.
And I remember that people raising their hands and asked, is there still going to be disco tonight? Is there still going to be the same program? And they said, we don't know yet. So just try to get in touch with everybody in Oslo, and we'll come back later.
On board the MS Thorbjorn, Johannes Giske received a message.
At that point, I got a call on the radio from the mainland saying that there is a police officer who wants to go to cross onto the island, and could a boat come over. We had cancelled all the rest of the scheduled boat crossings because we weren't expecting anyone. So I called the captain, and we decided that, okay, we're going to go down, we're going to pick this guy up.
As he approached the mainland, Johannes saw Brevik dressed in what appeared genuine police uniform. Brevik was a man of many uniforms.
He was wearing a kind of like a wetsuit. It looked a bit like a wetsuit with body armor or something on his chest, and a handgun on his thigh, and a very large rifle. And he had this very, very heavy box, black, kind of hard case, which someone helped him to carry onto the boat. He had these iPod headset that I thought was a bit strange, because, you know, this is the heaviest police in Norway. Has to be, you know, they're coming here to protect us, and why are they using iPods? But, you know, I thought, who am I to judge? You know, this could be some top secret, fantastic contraption they use to communicate with each other or something.
In fact, in his manifesto, Brevik had written that he would need to listen to his iPod as he began shooting to drown out the noise of any screaming. It might affect his resolve. The ferry slowly made its way to Utoya Island before docking 100 yards from the main reception hut.
When the captain left, he said, okay, but if you leave, you have to lock the boat. We never did that, but now he said, lock the boat, because, you know, this is strange, something is happening. And it is while I'm doing this, while I'm trying to lock this boat, that I hear gunshots for the first time.
It was 5:22 in the afternoon. Brevik was armed with a Glock pistol on which was engraved the word Mjolnir, the name given to the hammer used by the Norse god Thor. He also had a bayoneted rifle on which was engraved the word Gungnir, the name given to the spear used by the Norse god Odin. He first killed 2 adults, then he ordered a group of youngsters to gather around him before beginning to shoot them. Some ran.
I saw 2 girls running up towards the tent camp, and they were shot and killed. It was so weird to see, because we're used to see in movies and such that there's blood splatter and people screaming and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't make a sound. They just fell to the ground and suddenly didn't move.
Brevik walked slowly from one group of young people and children to another as he methodically killed.
He wore headphones, and he would go from cabin to cabin, from tree to tree, literally picking off people the way that he'd probably done 1,000 times before in his games. And one wonders if that's how he played the games. Was it, you know, getting into that mindset of, you know, it may be that he was drowning out the cries and the sounds, but I wonder if it was just something that improved his shot. It was just getting into that game that he was good at.
Despite his precautions, Brevik's headphones will not have shielded him from the noise of those he was hunting.
It's likely that between tracks on his iPod, he could hear the kids. They were screaming, they were running, they were terrified. But on he went.
It was probably around 5:55, just over half an hour after he had first killed, that Brevik approached the cabin in which Lisa Marie Husby was sheltering. She had been able to hear much of what was going on.
Suddenly we heard somebody outside, and he took the doorknob. There was chaos inside, and I was just under the bed, but I thought, oh my God, he's going to get in. He can hear that so many people are inside. So he shot 2 times through the window of the door, but he just left. And it's a miracle because we were almost 50 people inside.
There were 564 on the island. Was he going to kill them all?
He wants a spectacular, to make a big impact all over the world and overnight. He wants to be the killer of a lot of people.
Brevik had killed relentlessly for 50 minutes as Christopher and the children that were following him ran frantically away from the sound of gunfire.
Suddenly there were some shots that went through the trees. We could hear them really, really close, which made, I think, all of us just snap out of what we were doing. And it suddenly became really clear to me that we had to get away from here really quickly. I was standing around maybe 30 kids, and I just yelled out to all of them that we have to get away from here. So we're going to run down to the beach and we're going to swim for land.
Brevik will have known that safety advice for anyone swimming in the cold waters of a Norwegian fjord included wearing a wetsuit at all times and never going beyond 10 meters from shore. Cramp can set in so quickly that being able to return to the shoreline promptly is vital. The youngsters with Christopher now faced a journey of around 200 meters without wetsuits.
So I yelled out to everybody that they should take their clothes off and get into the water and start swimming.
I think he very much wanted to create chaos and terror. This was something that wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. He'd thought about this for a very long time. He knew that this would cause the utmost chaos. The very location of this island you can't get to by car, which means it would have given him the longest amount of time. This wasn't something that police could just run and come to. These children were like sitting ducks. There was nothing they could do.
The water was cold and it was rainy and windy and everybody was panicking. Some were getting cramps already. We weren't even halfway over. I figured that if I do backstroke, it's more not relaxing, but I don't use quite as much energy doing it. So I started to do that, and I could also get an overview of what was happening with the kids that were back on land. Just as I figured out that, he took up his rifle and he shot the kids that didn't want to swim. Because at the point there was no place to hide at all, it was all open.
Few serial killers get to kill as many times as Brevik, but on that island he took a conscious decision. He looked out, he took aim, and he killed 69 times.
I saw him pointing his rifle at me, at us, and I thought that I'm not going to watch him shoot me, so I'm going to turn around and swim normally again. And if I die, I hope I die quickly. And he fired some shots. I tried to keep my head low, so I was a bit underwater and stuff. But suddenly there was a kid missing from our group. I didn't know where he went.
Perhaps tired, perhaps he felt enough victims had been claimed, but at 6:25 he stopped shooting and reached for his mobile telephone.
Ja, god dagen. Her kommandør Anders Behring Brevik i den norske antikommunistiske motstandsbevegelsen. Jeg er på Utoya for øyeblikket. Jeg ønsker å overgi meg. Ok. Hvilket nummer ringer du fra? Jeg ringer fra mobil. Du ringer fra din mobil? Ja. Det er ikke min mobil, en annen. Hva heter det for noe? Hallo? Hallo?
Then there comes a moment where he stops. He feels that his mission is complete, and he calmly picks up the phone, calls the police, says, "I am Commander Brevik. I'm finished my mission. You can come and get me." So at no time does he see himself as someone who has perhaps caused one of the most horrific attacks of recent memory. He sees himself as a commander, as a leader, as someone who has to do this to wake people up.
He went there because he wanted to get right into the heart of attacking the Norwegian Labour Party. And he saw young Norwegian people becoming the political leaders of the Labour Party, and he wanted to attack where it hurt the most.
Brevik now believed Norway would change, the country would unite behind him. In fact, it united against him, and the young people who had survived his merciless killings determinedly unchanged.
My values might be even stronger than they were before.
I feel sorry for him in a way, and I know that it sounds weird, but I think that we are so many people standing together, and it must be so lonely in his world. Imagine he has nobody now. He's going to be alone for the rest of his life. And we are hundreds of thousands that stands together and believe in our cause, and we have each other, and we will always have each other.
I just see him and he's there, and yeah, I want to feel a sort of hate to him, and I feel, of course, a bit hate, but it's empty. It's empty inside of me.
This guy was white, he was a Christian, he was a born Norwegian, raised Norwegian. I guess at least we have learned that evil doesn't necessarily need to come from outside. It might be among us.
Is Brevik a serial killer? To be considered by criminologists as one, Brevik would have struck in Oslo, then disappeared from the scene, only to resurface later. But his was a plan which sought maximum and immediate impact. Victims would need to come thick and fast. Nevertheless, he may well qualify in this appalling category of killer.
This is not just the act of a spree-killing madman. It is a series of murders. He might have stopped at Oslo, he might have stopped at the ferry, he might have stopped after the first cabin that he shot into. But no, he goes on, searching for more victims.
Psychologists interviewed Brevik for many hours. Their lengthy findings concluded that he was a paranoid schizophrenic and had been since at least 2006, but that he was sane throughout the day that he killed 77 people. Brevik was eventually sentenced to 21 years in prison, but is unlikely ever to be released. Unusually, we know much of what was going on inside his mind and about his life.
Yes, he experienced the trauma of divorce, but so many kids do. Yes, he experienced the difficulty of not fitting in. A lot of people do. Yes, he wasn't successful in his job. Almost all of us at some point have to experience failure. In and of themselves, these things couldn't have made him who he was. But it was like a perfect storm at every point of his life, whether it was rejection, whether it was a feeling that he didn't belong, whether it was a projection onto a minority, whether it was his narcissism, whether it was his biochemistry, everything came together.
The snip of a cable is where the living hell about to be unleashed on the lives of Lorraine and Bill Courier begins. The man breaking into their home is no burglar. He's a killer.
He's cut the power lines, he's cut the phone lines, so Bill and Lorraine are effectively completely at his mercy.
They heard nothing, suspected nothing.
He's completely uninterested in them, their lives, or the devastation that their families will feel if they're harmed. He is as cold-hearted as it gets.
He switches on a head torch to help guide him around the house. He's mapped out his every move. He will decide what happens next. He's in total command of his environment, a soldier on maneuvers. Israel Keyes may have killed as many as 11 people, perhaps more. When in custody, he toys with investigators, gives away as little as possible. He has prepared himself to resist interrogation.
There were ways that I could manipulate this situation in this case, all the related cases, to my benefit and on my timeline by withholding information and giving information out.
Israel Keyes presents a fearsome adversary as detectives try to get inside the mind of a serial killer. Israel Keyes meticulously researches targets. He secretly observes groups of people, eyeing up who might be a suitable victim. He will choose based on the best way of avoiding detection.
Serial killers usually target a type of person to kill. They have a profile of who their victims should be.
Not Israel. In his case, he just wants to kill. He's actually chasing the kills rather than the high of killing a specific type of person. There's no pattern. He's trying to disrupt that.
He chooses by geography. If you are where he decides to hire a car, for example, you're in terrible danger.
We know he killed in Alaska and Vermont, and probably 4 more times in Washington state, possibly even overseas. But he teased investigators rather than tell them anything.
Did you find any knives in New York or in the boat? Folding knives, about 6 inches long.
I may have killed in New York, I may have killed more times than I have said, but I don't want to tell you, not yet.
With 3 verified murders and as many as 8 more likely victims, Israel Keyes enjoys the police interview room, an opportunity to show who's boss, to be in control.
Well, like I've said all along, my cooperation on other crimes is dependent on what's going on with crimes that I'm already charged with. So. And I've said that all along.
He uses the interrogation room like a stage. He's very much in control. He's got the information, but he doesn't tell them. He hints. He doesn't say, I'm not going to say. He hints. He sends them off in the wrong direction. He comes back. He's very much wanting to eke this out, to be in control.
What made Israel Keyes the killer he became? He has no reason to murder any of his victims. They don't owe him money. They're not former lovers. They have not offended him in any way. He does not hate any of them. He is a multiple murderer who simply wants to slaughter and not get caught. He is as dangerous an animal on the planet. Bill Courier and his wife Lorraine chose to live in a classic Vermont town. Safe, pretty, dependable. Not for them, the big city. A life of domestic calm in Essex Junction suited them just fine.
Israel Keyes likes to kill off the beaten track. Now that's a crucial criteria for him. So Essex Junction was small and it had a low crime rate. So for those who lived there, defences are right down. perfect killing conditions for Israel Keyes.
The way that he went about attacking Bill and Lorraine was kind of with military precision. You know, he's prepared. He cuts the phone lines, cuts the electrical lines, ensures that he's not making any noise, breaks into the house without them noticing. He's in control.
So the trap that Bill and Lorraine are in is not of their own making. They live in the wrong place at the wrong time. They live in a world of normality, about to be visited by a killer without a conscience. And nobody knows that he is out there.
48 hours earlier, Keyes flies from his home in Alaska into Chicago. He covertly takes in the scene, blends into the crowd at the airport. As the city goes about its business, Keyes is analysing his options. He rents a car and heads to a secret location deep in the Vermont countryside. There he retrieves his so-called kill kit. It is his calling card, the Keyes' signature method that distinguishes him from other serial killers.
He'd fly around the country and then find isolated areas to store his weapons and his provisions. And he'd cover them up. Now these kind of kill kits would be left in situ until he needed them. Of course, that also meant that on the days that he wanted to kill, he could minimise spending the time travelling with weapons or preparing.
Keyes, kill kit now safely at his fingertips, has a to-do list in his mind. He knows when police are on patrol, in downtown Chicago, in rural Vermont. He already knows the house he will break into.
He could not care less who he is about to attack. There's no reason to choose this couple. What interests him is the likelihood of success and of going undetected. Bill and Lorraine are literally tucking up in bed, and he knows that. His mode of operation includes a thorough understanding of what and who is around him.
Night falls, and possibly after switching off their favourite TV programme, Bill and Lorraine turn off their bedroom lights. They are completely oblivious to the man who's outside. He waits until they are likely to be asleep. He knows the weak spots in the house where he can easily gain entry, and he knows that the couple have no house alarm, no dog. He makes his move.
There's 3 people in this house, an innocent couple, and Israel, who's a killer.
How could anyone like Bill or Lorraine prepare for a moment like this? You cannot legislate for an Israel Keyes.
He reaches the foot of the stairs. There have been other times like this when he's decided to steal rather than to kill, to take any money that he finds and then escape. What will he do next? Will Bill and Lorraine make it through the night? Their lives in the balance, Keyes can hear Bill breathing heavily in his sleep. He's excited. Such power, such control. A moment to savour for a man seemingly destined to destroy the lives of others. Israel Keyes' terrifying personality takes shape in Utah, where his Mormon parents decide to homeschool him. A move to the rural state of Washington follows.
So as a child, he didn't come into contact with a lot of people. He was homeschooled, he doesn't have a lot of friends, not a lot of social activities. But having said that, there's no indication that he stood out for that reason.
Unknown to anyone in authority, Keyes comes into contact with the Christian identity white supremacist movement. He attends services with his family, but that's as far as it goes.
Keyes was definitely coming into contact with extreme behaviour.
There's evidence that he came across some pretty extreme racist views after his move to Washington State.
But was he guilty of hate crimes? Did he have a group to target? There is nothing to show that he did. He could have turned out to be a normal citizen.
He is not on anyone's radar as a problem individual.
Eventually, the US military think well enough of him to allow him to enlist. He serves mainly at what was then called Fort Lewis, becomes a specialist, receives an Army Achievement Award.
While he's in the army, I think he does one tour in Egypt. I'm not sure that he actually is involved in any serious military action, but he comes back, honorable discharge, no one picks up on anything out of the norm.
But the ingredients were remorselessly coming together to produce a menacing personality.
So what does that make Israel Keyes by the year 2000? He's a trained killer. His background includes coming into contact with hate groups.
Keyes hones his military skills: planning, method, drill.
Keyes has a mind which enjoys research and preparation. He's a man of logistics. He runs his life by a timetable. Be up at 7, have your clothes ready, laid out, work at 8, book a train ticket in advance, be at the station 15 minutes early. Logistics.
It is now around the year 2000 that he begins his series of murders. In a later interview, the cameras are off when Keyes describes closing himself down to observers.
There is no one who knows me, or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me, really. They know they're going to tell you something that does not line up with anything I tell you, because I'm two different people, basically. And the only person who knows about what I'm telling you, the kind of things I'm telling you, is me.
How long have you been two different people?
Long time. 14 years.
Keyes becomes nomadic, living in cabins in Washington woods, on boats, wherever he can't easily be traced. It is now he begins to kill.
I hit somebody in the head, so.
One of the great mysteries of the Israel Keyes story is, who did he kill?
At this point, it now looks certain that he killed about 4 people.
He claims to have murdered 4 times, and the police believe him, but they don't actually know who or where the bodies are.
He admits to disposing bodies somewhere in the countryside or in lakes. He won't say who he's killed or exactly where their bodies might be. He also reveals that he became concerned that his victim count might attract attention, so he makes another decision. Henceforth, he will kill outside of whichever state he chooses to live.
He recognizes that if he carries on killing in Washington, eventually someone will become suspicious. What he does from then on is to fly out of the state, kill and return. And he will always pay cash to avoid leaving a digital trail.
Which makes Keyes even more difficult to trace. As Bill and Lorraine turned in on the night of June 8, 2011, they were just 2 of millions of Americans who knew nothing of the man who was behaving like a sleeper, primed, always ready to kill as soon as he decides to. The police are not on his trail that night in Vermont. No extra patrols to protect the neighborhood. He has killed multiple times in 2011 as he walks up the stairs in the home of Bill and Lorraine Courier. It's a warm evening in Essex Junction. Bill and Lorraine are covered only with sheets as Keyes opens the door to their bedroom. He looks at them both, stops when he hears a creak from the floor, glances behind him. It is 3 a.m. He is relaxed. Israel can always relax when the pressure's on. He gets ready to pounce. Will Israel Keyes kill a middle-aged couple as they lie asleep in their bed? Will one of them wake and somehow frighten him away?
Their fate is sealed. Keyes has a plan. He will stick to it. But his crimes tend to always include an element other than murder.
Keyes needs money and he needs cash. If he's going to be flying here and there to kill people, he's got airfares, hire car bills, fuel charges.
Could Bill and Lorraine's home be a source of more cash? He scouts around.
Oddly enough, the value Keyes placed on stealing money during his episodes of murder might actually help keep Keyes from killing this couple.
Bill and Lorraine could provide another potential source of money. he could hold them to ransom.
He strikes.
He wakes them. We know he's armed, and he tells the couple to get out of bed.
His modus operandi was to use zip ties to bind his victims. He'd also gag them, and it looks like Bill and Lorraine got that treatment.
Keyes ordered the Vermont couple to go downstairs. He will have used force to show who was in control.
He was in charge, and if they wanted to stay alive, they had to do exactly as he said.
Keyes' mind is always clear. Control the victim, control the environment. Months earlier, he's discovered a barn. He will hide them, demand a ransom. He ties Bill to a stool, leaving Lorraine in the car. When he leaves the farm building, he sees her. She's wriggled out of the zip ties. She's running away.
This was not in the plan. He races after her. The 50-year-old woman is no match for the fit former soldier in his 30s.
He returns to the building with her. Bill has broken the stool that he'd been tied to and screams at Keyes.
He uses a shovel and he smashes it down on Bill's head. And then, as Lorraine watches, he shoots him dead.
Lorraine would be sexually assaulted and then strangled to death. Keyes' planning had not legislated for a couple who would not give in easily. Keyes bundles the bodies into refuse bags, drives hundreds of miles to upstate New York and disposes of them. He's the only one who knows where. He will release that information when it suits him, and if it's certain that it's good for his image.
Right, my concern, the problem is nowadays, the more stuff my name is attached to, the more likely it is that somebody's going to try to do some kind of stupid frickin' TV special, or, you know how it is nowadays, like with all this true crime bull that people are obsessed with, and that's
Keyes became unhappy at how information was reaching the media. He continued to refuse to reveal where Bill and Lorraine's remains are buried.
The only reason the Courier case has even become an issue is because of me wanting to keep control of that situation before it became a situation.
Self-control has been a key part of Keyes' life for a long time.
He has an obsession with solitude, and to a large extent an obsession with total control over his environment, not just what he sees, but what he hears, what he feels. He needs that space.
Detectives knew that if they could uncover the locations Keyes had buried his so-called kill kits, they would then know that he'd killed in that area. But his knowledge gives him power. Power he uses.
Keyes had travelled the country depositing these so-called kill kits near to where he will find a victim to murder. Police need that evidence. He doesn't stonewall. He prefers to cause as much disruption as possible.
He tells them there's one at the foot of a mountain range upstate in New York, or by a lake. He'll give them just enough information to mean that tens of thousands of hours are spent tracking the kill kits down. And all the time, he's sitting in his cell, pulling the strings, creating the moments.
Keyes was involved in a standoff. The control of information extends his mastery over events. During his life, he'd had relationships, became a father. He naively believes that he can use the knowledge that he has to stop information reaching his daughter, who lives in an area called Near Bay.
That's my concern, is that, if something else were to get out, and especially in a different area or something, then, and now there's the whole Near Bay aspect of it now too. It's like, my kid's living in Near Bay now, and gossip is the town pastime, so.
Who else had Keyes killed? A kill kit is discovered in New Hampshire. Keyes then reveals that he spent some time in New Jersey. Investigators show Keyes a series of images of missing people. As he sees one picture, an old, degraded snap of a woman called Deborah Feldman, he pauses as if in recognition.
Deborah Feldman was a perfect fit for Keyes' own unique victim profile. Because first of all, she was in the right place. She was near the kill kit that he'd stashed away so carefully. Secondly, she was one of life's unfortunate drifters.
She's an addict, so very easy target. And at this point, what he's doing is he's state hopping. He's going from state to state, trying to rack up murders, in effect.
Deborah's life had descended so far that friends and family had deserted her. Her son had pleaded with her to get clean or get out of his life. She turned to prostitution to raise cash for her habit. There are a few more at-risk groups than substance abuse-addled sex workers.
As with most things, Keyes never absolutely confirmed to detectives that he occasionally trawled for prostitutes, but it is strongly suspected that he did.
On the evening of April 8, 2009, Deborah Feldman was seen walking the streets of Hackensack, New Jersey. Israel Keyes is in town, probably in a car rental, probably looking for a victim, a drifter, someone he can control, and quickly.
Feldman was simply in no state to cope with a man like Israel Keyes. She is worthless in his eyes, simply a body to use for his own purposes.
Based on an understanding of his methods, a knowledge of Deborah Feldman, and on evidence that Keyes gave himself, detectives have pieced together what is likely to have happened next. Keyes knows the area. He entices the occasional sex worker into his vehicle. Deborah, desperate for money, asks Keyes what he wants her to do. In his car, his kill kit. He drives until a view from his mirror shows an empty road. It is not hard to guess what is going on inside the mind of a serial killer. As she sits, muddled by the drugs that she's already taken that day, Deborah Feldman tries to come to terms with what is happening.
Keyes never reveals the precise details of what he does with Deborah, but he does admit to driving hundreds of miles north, crossing state after state.
He will have subdued her.
We know he uses violence, immense relative strength against people like Deborah. He punches, he ties his victims' hands.
He sexually attacks the women he has chosen as victims. On this long journey, Deborah Feldman will have discovered that to her cost.
Having driven through the night, Keyes arrives at a place called Tupper Lake in New York State. Close by, plenty of open, remote spaces. He needs money.
He's involved in a robbery in a place called Tupper Lake, and interestingly, this is somewhere where there's also an unsolved murder.
His confirmed presence in Tupper Lake will become vital to investigators as they piece together Keyes' life.
The bank robbery places him many miles from where he now lived, with no family or work nearby.
As with other women he would target, Keyes' habit was to render them defenseless. Somewhere out in a wooded area of New York State, Deborah Feldman seems certain to have been left, barely if at all conscious, whilst Keyes committed the robbery. Would he return to kill her? Relying on previous scouting trips to the area, he would have chosen a place where the body of Deborah could not easily be found, and where he could carry out whatever he planned, certain that he will not be discovered.
You know, it's interesting. We use all these clinical terms. We talk about sociopathy and psychopathy, and we speak about lack of empathy when we're talking about serial killers.
We can safely assume that during her long ordeal, Deborah felt frantic fear and agonizing terror at what is happening to her.
This is, in reality, probably one of the most horrific things to be confronted with. Somebody that's sitting there across from you, over you, wanting you to perish, to die, wanting to bring your end about, and the amount of fear, and the amount of confusion, and just lack of any sense of reality that must be there for these people must be just horrific.
The detail of her ordeal tells us much about the evil of Israel Keyes.
An ordeal which ends in her death. The body of Deborah Feldman has never been discovered. Putting all of the evidence together suggests to detectives that she was sexually abused, then strangled. On seeing her snapshot, Keyes simply said, "I don't want to talk about that yet."
Keyes did eventually tell investigators that he drove Feldman to Tupper Lake. Now, we know he was there because of the evidence which emerged from the bank robbery. The body of Deborah Feldman is in that area somewhere.
Is it in Tupper Lake? Keyes reveals during his interviews a fascination for dumping the bodies of his victims in such places.
How long does a body last in a freshwater lake? I mean, because there's no critters that eat
It depends how.
bodies in
It depends how
freshwater lakes, right?
deep. I learned a lot.
Because it depends how deep the
Depends how deep it
temperature of
is,
the water.
and if the body's contained in something.
And it's not critters, it can be like
Bacteria.
Yeah. Organisms.
You know about Lake Crescent in Washington.
How deep is it?
I think that lake is 500 to 700 feet deep. They've never been to the bottom of it. There's people who've gone off that lake, and they still haven't found their cars or anything.
And that's the lake?
That's one of the lakes.
What we're seeing is a man who's savouring his moment in the spotlight. You listen to him and he sounds composed. He sounds nerveless.
I don't know how deep it was. I know the general area. I had a fish finder, but it didn't register how deep it was. I just know it was over.
Maxed out at 100 feet. Oh, is that your fish finder goes to 100?
I don't remember. I just know if you've been to the lake, you would see what I'm talking about. It drops down like a V. So
Again, a tease that her body might be underwater. But that's all he has said about where she and others might be.
I think he's getting a lot of pleasure. He's holding court. He's the center of attention. You can see from his body language. So there's this sense of cat and mouse, of giving them a little bit and then taking it back. He's clearly enjoying it.
He revels in the human and economic cost of his strategy.
I almost feel guilty. Costing the taxpayers a lot of money to find them. But I just kept my mouth shut.
Keyes' pattern of behaviour is unique amongst serial killers. By now, 2009, he's living in Anchorage, Alaska, and choosing victims several time zones away. If anyone was looking into the disappearance of Deborah Feldman, Keyes would simply not be under suspicion. But the meticulous planner has taken risks. Holding up a bank, for example.
By the time Deborah Feldman is killed, Keyes is becoming brazen. Is he trying to be caught? Does he want the notoriety? Is there some sense of right and wrong displaying itself by behaving recklessly? Or is he just bloated on his own success, no longer concerned about getting caught? That, for me, is the much more likely scenario.
It is February 1st, 2012. Israel Keyes is back in Alaska. By his own account, he's killed at least 7 times. Who will be next? Samantha Kernik is working late in the Common Grounds coffee booth in Anchorage. Of course, Keyes knows this. He has scouted out the location, is aware of the comings and goings, and when the little shop is most likely to be empty. The snow is deep at this time of the year, helping create a sometimes eerie silence. And it helps Keyes that a mountain of snow has been moved adjacent to the highway, so no one can easily see the shack from the road. He sits outside in his truck. Around 8 o'clock, closing time, surveillance cameras inside the Common Grounds record events. Samantha turns to see Keyes at the counter, ordering a coffee. She gets the drink and can be seen chatting to her customer. The adjacent car park still has a number of vehicles. Keyes is looking around. Are there any witnesses to what's about to happen? The cup is nearly full. Does he want room for cream? She hands him the drink, tells him the price, looks away as he reaches to his pocket, and when she turns around, leans towards the counter to collect the money.
He's pointing a gun at her.
She reacts physically. She falls backwards. So you see her initially just sort of going about her job, making the coffee, and then she turns around and you see her lift her hands up and fall back. At this point, clearly she recognizes that he's got a gun and he wants to harm her.
He orders her to switch off the lights, warns her he's tracking every move.
She's a girl caught in a moment of absolute terror.
Next, he actually forces her to turn around and sit down in the bottom of this cabin.
Minutes pass. It is likely that he is emotionless as he tells Samantha what will happen if she does not do precisely what he says. He tells her that he's killed before, that the only way she can stay alive is to obey his instructions. He's glancing around the car park as he talks. If someone appears, he can escape, but nobody does. Samantha is on her own, terrified.
Israel Keyes oozes menace. His calmness when holding Samantha Kernik at gunpoint is the same calm that he shows when he's being interviewed by the police. Now add to that level of composure a gun pointed right at you, and you will do exactly what you're told.
He knows this moment. He's seen it many times before. Samantha has to believe that her only hope is to submit to his will.
It was a ritual for Keyes. He enjoys the precision of his actions. He'd waited until closing time, ensured there was nobody else in the Common Grounds cafe. The area was deserted. Everything was going according to plan. He orders her to empty the cash till. She does so. Over the following moments, she can be seen responding to various instructions. She's told to put something in a refuse bin. She's ordered to sit on the floor of the cabin.
She just sits there, prone in the dark, while he tells her to put on her coat.
And at this point, she must be realizing that perhaps this isn't a robbery, this is something else.
He climbs through the serving hatch. He can't have seen the vehicle which is pulled up behind him as someone is collected.
It was his most brazen attack. Would the passerby spot what was happening?
They didn't. Keyes clambers into the store. He seems not to have realized there were security cameras, an unusual mistake. He has Samantha at his feet.
He gagged her, starts physically manhandling her, and as she's on the floor, he binds her wrists with zip ties. He pulls her to her feet and forces her to the rear door.
He checks the cash register and then can be seen exiting out of the back.
He drags her to his truck and drives her back to his home. Now, this is a rare instance where Keyes is operating on his own doorstep, but he makes mistakes.
Keyes has never behaved this way. He has literally left tracks. Zip ties with his fingerprints on them have fallen to the floor, and he leaves behind her cell phone.
He left Samantha constrained in a shed adjacent to his house and had to return for her mobile phone and the zip ties he had dropped.
So at this point, he's driven her out, he's tied her up, and he has to leave and go back and get this mobile phone. So in order to drown out her screams, he puts on this really loud music, but again, very calmly, goes back, gets the phone, and returns.
Samantha, like Keyes' other victims, fits no particular profile that he has in mind. She's simply an available target. Though he had a daughter himself, Keyes behaves brutally towards his victim.
Samantha was just 18, and you'd think that her age would prompt in Keyes some level of humanity, but no. Instead, it just escalated the kind of level of his coldness towards his victim.
Anyone can imagine what must be going through this young woman's mind. So she knows that this person is intending to harm her. She knows he's got a gun. By this point, she will have picked up on his own cues, how he's dealing with her, how single-minded he is, how cold, how aggressive. And she's all alone. She's all alone with no way of communicating what's happening.
Had Keyes made so many mistakes that this time he would be discovered? Would he return to the Common Grounds coffee shack to discover police had been called? Would he finally pay the price of an error of judgment? After tethering Samantha, he left her, by now freezing, in a shed adjacent to his home. He then returns to the car park. There is no sign that the alarm has been raised. It is still too soon for Samantha's family to be worried that she'd not returned home. He collects the abandoned zip ties, gathers up Samantha's mobile telephone. That will come in useful. In the shed, Samantha Kernik can do nothing. Is she being kidnapped? Will she be raped? How bad is her situation? Keys returns. He already knows the answer to those questions.
This sort of behaviour's become routine. It's just another day at the office for Keys.
I think it's very unlikely that Israel is feeling any empathy at all. He's very single-minded here. He wants to get a kill, and he wants to get away with it.
He has not a moment's thought for the girl he has at his mercy. Will he kill her? Will he hold her for ransom? Will he sexually assault her? These are his thoughts, not, I wonder if she is frightened.
He described himself at one point as a monster, and that is a fair description.
Samantha hears him coming. She's considered the awful options available to her attacker. Which will he choose? Sometime on February 2nd, 2011, Israel Keys told Samantha Kernik to relax. He was kidnapping her to get a ransom, and then she would be free. But he was lying. He raped her and then strangled Samantha Kernik to death. She may have been praying that he would spare her, but that was never in his mind. In typical Israel Keys fashion, he'd planned the next few weeks to the last detail. He would leave Samantha's body in the shed and then disappear.
He'd already booked a vacation starting later that day.
The fact that he rapes and kills Samantha actually serves another purpose. Not only has he satisfied this need to kill and to hurt, but actually he's planned to go on a cruise. So he's able to rob her as well. So he's able to get some cash for this cruise that he's pre-planned.
But Keys was to do more. He knew Samantha was dead. Nobody else did. As he enjoyed his cruise, Keys was already planning his next move. He needed money.
He had always intended to demand a ransom for the release of Samantha. He knew enough to know her family was not wealthy, but he had a plan for that too.
A plan he had actually revealed to Samantha.
He told her a public appeal would be fine to raise the ransom money.
Whilst he was away, police issued appeals for information about Samantha. She had simply disappeared. Someone must know something. A reward was offered. Days passed, then weeks, until a text message is received by Samantha's family.
I think the level of cruelty is actually difficult to comprehend. So what he does is he kills Samantha, he goes on his cruise, he comes back, and he decides that he wants some money. So he props her body up to make her look alive.
He wanted $30,000 for her safe return, and he sent a photo of Samantha apparently holding a local paper from just a few days earlier.
He puts a newspaper in her hand of the current date, takes a picture with her mobile phone, and then sends it to her parents asking for $30,000. Her parents don't have this money, but they issue an appeal to the public. They get the money and they send it to him, and all this time their daughter's been dead for weeks.
It was deposited in Samantha's account, which Keys now had access to. All the time, Keys alone knows that Samantha is dead. As more days pass, more weeks, Samantha's family, friends and the city of Anchorage lost hope that she'd been spared by whoever had kidnapped her.
But at least Keys started making mistakes.
When the parents of Samantha electronically transfer the money, the police are then able to see what activity is going on in the account. So every time he withdraws money, depending on where he is in which state, they know where he is. He ends up in Texas, where he's driving.
He exceeded by just 3 miles an hour the speed limit in Lufkin, Texas. A police patrol car pulled him in.
And inside the car, rolls of cash, a face mask, Samantha's stolen credit card, even her mobile phone. The Israel Keys series of murders was over.
But in many ways, the mystery had just begun. There was little that Keyes could do to back up any claim that he might be innocent. As he sat in the interview room back in Alaska, it became clear that police had the evidence to secure a conviction. Shortly into the interrogation sessions, he began to reveal the truth about a 14-year killing spree.
The turning point in his story was a moment when police told him they would be going through his computers.
And so began a series of at times oddly jovial verbal bouts as Keyes danced around the facts of his murderous life and interrogators tried to win his confidence.
Did you have a place up there that you go to buy guns?
No, not in New York. I never bought guns officially. I was always under the table.
Keyes would show his frustration that details of the case were leaking out to the media. He wanted to decide how and when that should happen. And he already knew exactly how he wanted to die.
The death penalty is what I want.
Wanting the death penalty became a crucial part of the interviews. He needed to ensure that the state he'd stand trial in had capital punishment. Alaska and Vermont did not. Washington did.
He began manoeuvring the system to his own needs. He really did push the detectives for information about what crimes they knew of. He exchanged information for a purpose.
And he began to hint that he might not tell them anything at all.
If I'm dead, then the investigation from the federal government's point of view is pretty much closed.
40 hours of toing and froing was to follow before Keyes had the last word on matters. 3 months before his scheduled trial, Keyes managed to smuggle a sharp object into his cell.
Then he did what he threatened he would all along. Israel Keyes killed himself.
He cut his wrists whilst also hanging himself. His suicide means that it's unlikely we will ever know just how many people Israel Keyes had killed. He didn't put a figure on the number of victims.
It was the final act of a man determined that he and he alone should be the master of his destiny. His final triumph, if you like. You can't control me, even when you have me.